Welcome back to Ironsworn, Rime the Frostmaiden. This is episode 21. This episode is going to be a review of chapter 1 and how the game has gone so far. We're going to talk about what we learned about Karl, what we learned about Icewind Dale, Rime the Frostmaiden. We have some reflections about playing Ironsworn, and then some miscellaneous thoughts that I have to share. So if you're interested in just watching Ironsworn being played, go ahead and go to the next video. If you're curious about how this first chapter is wrapped up, go ahead and stay tuned. First of all, thanks to Isaac, I-Z-E-C-K, for commenting and watching the videos. It's always nice to know that there's an audience out there. I really enjoy running these games and playing them, but obviously it's being done for an audience. So thank you, everybody who's watching. And if you haven't yet, please comment so that I know that there are people out there that are enjoying this. What have we learned about Karl? Well, we've learned that he's afraid of height. He's had a lot of misses on his various face dangers around heights, and I've always had him take stress for that. And so I think that narratively what's developed is that Karl doesn't like heights. And I really love that because that shows how the character can be influenced by the dice rolls. The dice are another player in the game, basically. They are introducing all sorts of story elements, and if you take those opportunities to develop the story, then it'll make the game richer. In episode 2, I explicitly said that Karl is not a kick in the door guy, and then later on he started to use the kick in the door strategy. So I just thought that was kind of fun that he started off as this very, calculating, planning sort of guy who I think he still definitely is, but he's also realized that sometimes you just need to kick the door in. Karl is compassionate on a sort of fundamental level, but I think his compassion primarily extends to the weak and the poor and those who can't protect themselves. He is surprisingly okay with murder. He straight up murdered the Duergar in East Haven, and then he murdered Sefik Caltro. So I think that Karl is pissed off by people that hurt other people, and that's kind of how he justifies it to himself. But it does suggest that there could be a dark turn in the future for Karl. We'll see. The changes that I made to the story of having the Children of Arl be the bad guys, primarily Ravison and Sefik Caltro, as well as the Knights of the Black Sword. They were kind of an offshoot of the Children. I really like that. So thanks to Sly Flourish for that suggestion. I think it ties the bad guys in really nicely. The law of conservation of NPCs, I also used regularly. I thought that went well. I think it's fun to have recurring characters who will hopefully continue to recur throughout the rest of these videos. Let's go through the adventures in chapter 1 and kind of what we thought of them. So the opening adventures, Cold-Hearted Killer, this is the one where you pick up that has you go after Sefik Caltro. That is, as written, pretty challenging. And there's a lot of resources online that tell you how to modify that quest so that your first level PCs don't get wiped out. The other starting quest, Nature Spirits, we ran sort of in the middle of things. I thought it was a little bit thin. I didn't think there was very much for the characters to do there. They might have had a couple of random adventures potentially chasing after the Nature Spirits, but there really weren't very many encounters for them. So I'm not sure how I feel about that being an opportunity to level up from first to second level in D&D. In Bremen, there is the lake monster, which Karl faced and failed tremendously to do anything with. But I like the adventure as written. I think that it's enough challenge, and it's not necessarily a combat adventure, which I appreciate. So I think I don't want to make any changes to that. In Bryn Shander, the Foaming Mugs quest is to get the iron ingots that the goblins have stolen back for the dwarves. I also like this because it gets you out of the towns and into the tundra a little bit, has some wilderness adventures, and the goblins are not necessarily going to put up a fight. And so I like that you could potentially resolve that without combat. In Caer Dineval, we had the Knights of the Black Sword who would hold up in the Caer. As written, I think it's not bad. There's not too much motivation for the characters to go deal with these bad guys. And exploring the Caer can be a little bit tedious potentially. I really like the Frozen Cistern in the base, and the Soothsayer was a good opportunity to get some information into the characters. So overall, I think the Caer Dineval is okay. In Caer Konig, we had the Unseen, where invisible dwarves were stealing things. This led to the Duergar outpost. I actually really liked this. I thought that it was a good balance of exploration and combat, and the fact that Karl and Half had to go back and complete kind of clearing it out was nice opportunity for them to explore the whole thing. In Dugan's Hole, hold up where the wolves lure them to the Frost Giant Ice Lodge. I think this is also pretty good as written. As written, there's a mammoth there that's kind of the most dangerous thing, and that mammoth can be pretty challenging for D&D characters. So just be aware of that as you're running this, that your second level characters may have a hard time fighting a woolly mammoth. In East Haven, you have a variety of things that you can encounter. So there's Ronaldo and his seance, which gives your characters an opportunity to get some key information that they can't otherwise get. And I thought that played out fine. You might need a reason for why the characters interact with Ronaldo, but I think that you can engineer that easily. And then Toil and Trouble is the main adventure in East Haven, where the PCs have to find these lost fishermen who have been kidnapped and eaten by this hag in the Cauldron Caves. And that played out pretty well for us. I think that in D&D it would work quite nicely because there's a number of encounters leading up to that final encounter with the hag. And the caves were fun to explore and very thematic. There's also an optional adventure in East Haven that we didn't get to, a couple of capers. And if your characters are interested in spending more time in East Haven, I think that those could work out well. I choose not to pursue them because they weren't really on Karl's radar. He's not really trying to solve other people's problems. He's just finding his sister. In Good Mead, the mead must flow, where the mead gets stolen by the Verbeeg. I thought that this worked pretty well. I think that it's best to have the ogre be the bad guy that actually killed the people of Goodmead, though, because this Verbeeg has been living here for quite a while, and he doesn't have any quarrel with the people of Goodmead. So I think making him sort of a little bit hapless and his ogre companion is the one who did the violence is the best way to run that. In Lonely Wood, of course, where we started out was the White Moose and the Elven Tomb. I really liked the Elven Tomb. I thought it was very sort of atmospheric. As written, a lot of the things require certain phases of the moon to activate. And I don't think I would give my players that much time or credence that they would like really dig down and figure that out. The thing with the tomb and the mummy also, I'm not sure, depending on how, D&D grave robbery your characters are, that may or may not work out. But exploring the Elven Tomb and then having the confrontation with the Frost Druid Revison, I think worked well for Lonely Wood. In Targos Mountain Climb, where Garrett has taken a bunch of adventurers up Kelvin's Cairn, I really like this one. I like that it takes the PCs into a different part of 10 towns and gets them out exploring the tundra and has classic fantasy winter weather sorts of challenges. I really like that the Yeti attacked and that there's the Yeti Tyke and there's maybe a little bit of a moral quandary, like what do we do with these monsters? So I think that played out pretty well. In Tourmaline, a beautiful mine where there are monsters invading the mine, we went and explored that, found the horrible Grell, and also encountered the kobolds. I really like that as written, the kobolds are not necessarily going to fight to the death, that they can be convinced to come along with the characters and actually become like good citizens of Tourmaline. That just kind of tickles me. So I liked A Beautiful Mine. And those are the adventures. I think that you could take any of them individually and stick them into existing campaigns with pretty minimal adjustments. I think that they're all pretty straightforward for me, which is important when I'm thinking about taking a single adventure and importing it into an existing game. And the sites are relatively small. The maps aren't really these extensive dungeons. There's just a handful of rooms, so enough for the characters to explore, but not so much that you're going to sidetrack the campaign substantially. In terms of running Ironsworn, I made a lot of rules problems running the game so far. I'm going to try to remedy that. I've read my assets. I've reread the Ironsworn rulebook, trying to tighten down on making sure that I'm following the rules as written. And, it's a lot to keep in my brain. I'm accustomed to being just the dungeon master and letting the players figure out their characters and telling me what's going on with them. So playing both the role of the player and the dungeon master is surprisingly cognitively demanding. You really have to keep a lot of things in mind when you're doing both roles. So excuse me if I sometimes mess up the rules or don't get them quite right. I am working on it and hopefully we'll be improving that through chapter 2. Some miscellaneous thoughts that I have that came up from finishing chapter 1. First of all, as we know, there's a lot of combat in D&D. I brought this up at the beginning of episode 17, where the characters enter the Cauldron Caves. The D&D is pretty much designed for your characters to be in a dungeon, have a bunch of encounters, and then have a epic encounter at the end. And that is a fine style of play. It doesn't work super great with Ironsworn. And Ironsworn, after one, maybe two fights, you're usually beaten down pretty substantially, unless you get super lucky. I have noticed that Ironsworn tends to be a little bit swingy, that I've had a couple of encounters that went extremely well, very quickly finished, and a couple of encounters that I just could not end and got super beaten down on, that I didn't expect to be that much of a challenge. So I think that looking forward towards the rest of the game, I might resolve more of these combats as battles with the Ironsworn rules, rather than getting into the nitty-gritty of enter the fray and then individual strikes, etc. That's just not where the fun is for me. I like to have the plots and the character development and the story, and that's really where I find my fun. Combat is great. It's fine. If you enjoy it, no worries. Carry on as before. If you'd like a little bit less combat, I think a lot of the adventures in Icewind Dale you can resolve without combat, which is my personal preference. When I started off with the game and Karl's motivations and finding his sister Bridget, I really conceptualized it as, like I said at the time, Mulder finding his sister Samantha, that was a through line throughout all of X-Files, and that was really the vibe I was going for. It turned into a little bit more of the rescue the captured woman trope, which I'm really not a fan of. So if you noticed that and was irked by it, I also noticed it and was a little bit irked by it. Bridget, the character as written, is awesome and a badass herself, and we're going to see that hopefully going forward to chapter 2. So I realized the captured woman trope showed up, and that wasn't really the vibe I was going for. Maybe in the future, I could have made Bridget younger or maybe older. I think that maybe minimizes that trope. Could have made Bridget Karl's brother or a friend of his, and so gotten around that trope a little bit more. A question that might come up, did I fudge any dice rolls? Because I did a lot of cuts when the dice were rolling. And the answer is no, I didn't fudge any dice rolls. All the rolls were legit. There were a lot of unexpected consequences, and that's what's cool about Ironsworn in any D&D game. The dice are a player, and what happens with them is unexpected and contributes to the story. And if you take that and roll with it, then it creates a lot of fun. I did have a segment where I recorded an episode. The audio wasn't working though, so I had to re-record it. On the re-record, I got a bunch of misses with matches and entered a horrible death spiral, and decided to re-record that because originally Karl made it through okay. Going forward into chapter 2, we have more characters that we've met now. We have Half, obviously, we have Bridget, we have Garrett, we have some other NPCs that we might be able to reach to if Karl dies. So I've been a little bit protective of Karl sometimes with some of these encounters. Going forward, I'm going to be fully okay with Karl dying and one of these other heroes potentially taking up the quest. Hopefully that won't happen, but I think giving that more opportunity is going to make for the tension to be a little more dramatic. Those are the lessons that I took away from chapter 1. Overall, I think Icewind Dale is pretty well written. The tone is maybe a little bit difficult. There's kind of the silliness with the Chwingas is a little bit at odds with the grimness of the setting. And maybe you need that levity. Maybe it's good to have some kind of light moments to lighten up the tension. So your gaming table may decide what they like for the tone there. I think Icewind Dale does work really well with Ironsworn. Ironsworn is this very gritty, man against nature sort of thing, which is definitely what Icewind Dale is all about. And I think that the rule set actually work pretty darn well between running Rime of the Frostmaiden via Ironsworn. So I think that's working out well for us. If you choose to run chapter 1, either using D&D or Ironsworn or whatever system you like to use, you probably don't need to go through all of the adventures. I think the advice in the book is to get the PCs to do sort of 4 or 5 of these adventures and level up so that they can be strong enough to face greater challenges around Icewind Dale. And I think that that's a reasonable recommendation. Certainly you could run all of the adventures if your players are really enjoying it, but if they want to get into a little bit more of the meat of the meta storyline, then progressing them through after a few adventures seems like a good strategy. Thanks for watching through chapter 1, and next episode we are going to get Karl and hopefully Bridget and Half further out into the tundra around Icewind Dale in chapter 2. Thanks for watching.